It's been 4,901 days for this family with no answers.
Andrea's car was discovered abandoned on a narrow dirt road near the edge of a national park, just a few miles from her relative's home. The doors were unlocked, the keys were gone, and there was no trace of Andrea anywhere. Her father, realizing something was terribly wrong, immediately contacted the police. Within minutes, officers arrived and sealed off the area, marking the car as a potential crime scene. After a brief discussion, investigators decided to check the house Andrea had been keeping an eye on for her uncle while he was away. With his permission, they forced the door open and began a cautious search. At first, everything appeared normal. The kitchen was tidy, the living room undisturbed. But as they made their way downstairs into the dimly lit basement, the atmosphere changed. A heavy silence filled the air. And there, in the cold shadows below, they discovered what every parent fears most. The quiet town of Otisville was never the same after that day. Neighbors who once left their doors unlocked now double-checked every latch at night. Dear viewers, thank you for choosing our video and our channel. We put a lot of effort into making sure you enjoy being with us. Andrea Ailber entered the world on April 17, 1991, in the city of Flint, Michigan, a community known for its grit and resilience. From a young age, Andrea experienced both love and loss. When she was still a child, her mother passed away, a moment that would forever shape her quiet strength and maturity beyond her years. In time, her father remarried, and the family began a new chapter together. Seeking a slower, safer pace of life, they eventually settled in the small, peaceful town of Otisville. It was there, surrounded by open fields and close-knit neighbors, that Andrea spent her teenage years and graduated from high school. After graduation, Andrea didn't rush into college. Like many young adults, she was still figuring out her path. For the time being, she decided to work and save money, taking a job at a local supermarket just a short drive from home. Friends and co-workers often described her as warm, funny, and down-to-earth. The kind of person who could brighten an ordinary day with a simple smile. It was at that supermarket that she met Kenneth, a 19-year-old co-worker. What began as small talk during shifts soon grew into a friendship, and then into something more. The two started dating, spending time together after work, sharing favorite movies, and dreaming about what the future might hold. In November of 2011, Andrea's aunt and uncle decided to take a short trip out of town. They trusted Andrea completely, so they asked her to stay at their house to keep an eye on things while they were away. It seemed like a perfect arrangement. Andrea still lived with her parents, and this would give her a little space of her own for a few days. She packed a small bag, grabbed a few essentials, and moved in temporarily to the cozy home. For the first few days, everything seemed perfectly normal. Kenneth and another friend came by in the evenings to visit. They'd make popcorn, watch movies, and laugh late into the night. It was an easy, carefree time, typical for two young people in love. Then, on November 14th, everything changed. Andrea and Kenneth had made plans to spend that evening together. Kenneth was supposed to be picked up by Andrea, but shortly before she was due to arrive, she sent him a text message saying she couldn't make it after all. Instead, she invited him to come over to her aunt and uncle's house and bring a few movie DVDs. It wasn't unusual. Andrea loved quiet nights in. When Kenneth arrived at around 7:30 p.m., something immediately felt off. The house was dark. Every door was locked, and Andrea's car wasn't in the driveway. He knocked several times, but no one answered. Thinking maybe she'd just stepped out for a quick errand, Kenneth waited outside for a while. Half an hour later, he received another message from Andrea. She said her plans had changed again and that they'd see each other the next day. She didn't explain where she had gone, and when Kenneth texted back, she didn't respond. At first, Kenneth didn't panic. People get busy, plans shift, and phones die. It happens. But when another full day passed with no word from Andrea, he began to worry. He tried calling again, then texting, but every attempt went unanswered. Andrea's father wasn't alarmed right away. He thought she might simply be occupied at her aunt and uncle's house or spending time with friends. But as another day passed, that calm turned to concern. When his own calls went unanswered, he he knew something was wrong. He reached out to another family member and asked them to stop by the house. She went there with Kenneth, who was now visibly anxious. Together, they walked around the property, peered through the windows, and called Andrea's name. The place was empty. Her car was gone, and there was no sign of her inside. That night, the growing worry spread through the family. Calls went out to Andrea's friends and coworkers, but no one had seen or heard from her in more than 24 hours. The unease that had started as quiet concern now turned into full-blown fear. Something was not right. As dusk settled over Otisville, family and friends began an organized search. They split into small groups, driving through nearby towns, wooded areas, and local parks, anywhere Andrea might have gone. Hours passed with no luck, until one of her friends made a chilling discovery. Andrea's car was found parked in a remote area near a national park, only a few miles from her relative's home. The car doors were unlocked, and the keys were missing. There was no sign of Andrea. Her father immediately called the police, and officers rushed to the scene. After securing the area, investigators decided to check the house Andrea had been watching. With permission from her uncle, they forced entry. As they moved from room to room, everything seemed quiet at first, until they went down to the basement. There, they found what every parent fears most. Andrea's body was located, and though investigators were cautious in their wording, it was clear that she had lost her life under bad circumstances. The medical examiner later confirmed she had been killed by a single gunshot wound from several feet away. The timing placed her death 2 days before she was found, on the very night she had sent Kenneth that final message. At first glance, the basement and house didn't look like the scene of a robbery. Most valuable items were untouched. Jewelry, electronics, even gold pieces were still sitting in plain sight. Yet, strangely, a few personal items were missing. A bottle of perfume, a sweater, a small camera, 3 knives, a rifle, a few bullets, and a small amount of cash. The selection made little sense to investigators. Detectives began interviewing everyone close to Andrea, retracing her last known movements and communications. Kenneth, her boyfriend, was cooperative from the start. When officers arrived at his house, he calmly explained everything he knew. The texts, the canceled plans, the unanswered messages. He willingly provided DNA samples and fingerprints, and even gave them the clothes he had worn that night. Police also searched his home, but found nothing that linked him to the crime. Despite his cooperation, detectives weren't ready to let go of their suspicions. Kenneth had already spoken to police several times, but they brought him back once more for extended questioning. As the hours dragged on, investigators began leaning heavily toward a single theory: that Kenneth himself was responsible for Andrea's death. Kenneth firmly denied any involvement. He didn't hesitate when they asked if he would take a polygraph test. He sat for the exam, answered every question calmly, and when the results came back, they showed no signs of deception. Still, his denials did little to change the investigators' growing belief that he might somehow be connected. When they asked him to go over the night of November 14th again, Kenneth gave the same account he'd given before. Only this time, he filled in more details. After Andrea unexpectedly canceled their plans, he admitted he was crushed. They had been close for months, and her sudden change of heart felt like a sign that something was wrong between them. "I thought she was going to break up with me," he explained. Feeling rejected, Kenneth said he went home, plugged in his phone, and messaged a female friend. In that text, he confided that Andrea might be ending things. The two exchanged messages back and forth, and later that night, Kenneth decided to stop by the store where she worked. They talked in person for a while, mostly about Andrea, about relationships, and about what he should do next. According to both the friend and her roommate, Kenneth eventually joined them at their apartment later that evening. Around 10 p.m., they all watched a movie together, trying to lighten the mood. The women later confirmed this timeline, and Kenneth's story was consistent every time he told it. But despite the corroboration, detectives weren't satisfied. They weren't ready to cross him off the list. While investigators were re-examining Kenneth's story, another detail emerged, one that deepened the mystery. At nearly the same time Kenneth claimed to be with his friends, another $300 withdrawal was made from Andrea's bank account. This time, it was in a different town, even farther away. Police obtained surveillance footage from the ATM where the transaction took place. The video quality was poor, grainy, filmed in low light. But one detail stood out. The person using Andrea's card had arrived in a white pickup truck. Unfortunately, the footage wasn't clear enough to identify the individual or even confirm their gender. Still, the new information added another layer of confusion to an already tangled case. Even so, suspicion continued to point toward Kenneth. Investigators kept circling back to small details in his story, inconsistencies that, to them, felt meaningful. First, Kenneth had admitted that he drove to Andrea's relative's house around the same time she was believed to have been killed. He said he parked outside, waited for about half an hour, and then left after getting a text from her saying her plans had changed again. To detectives, this seemed unusual. Why would he stay parked outside in the dark for so long, especially when she wasn't responding to his calls? Second, when Andrea's friends and family organized a search for her on the night of November 15th, Kenneth told them he couldn't join because he had to work early the next morning. At first glance, this sounded dismissive. But when detectives later asked about it, Kenneth explained that he had already spent the entire day trying to reach her. He had called her again and again, checked places she might have gone, and genuinely believed she was just ignoring him. Not that something serious had happened. To him, it felt like the painful end of a relationship, not the beginning of a tragedy. Then came another curious moment. One of Kenneth's friends, who was helping in the search, asked for the address of Andrea's aunt and uncle's house. For reasons he later struggled to explain, Kenneth gave him the wrong location, one that was about 3 miles away. Investigators saw this as suspicious. Kenneth had visited that house several times before and knew exactly where it was. Why would he suddenly forget? None of these details were proof of guilt, but they were enough to keep the pressure on. Over the next few days, Kenneth spent more than 10 hours in the interrogation room. Detectives questioned him repeatedly, cycling through the same topics: Andrea's texts, his movements, the withdrawals, the night of the 14th. The tone of the conversations shifted from curious to confrontational. Eventually, after hours of questioning, police made an announcement. Kenneth had confessed. In his written statement, Kenneth said that he had gone to Andrea's that night and walked into the house. When he went down to the basement, he claimed he found her already lying on the floor. Fearing that her family would be devastated, he said he tried to make the scene look like a break-in, hoping they wouldn't have to face the idea that Andrea had hurt herself. He admitted to taking a few small items from the house, things that were lying nearby, but insisted he hadn't caused her death. "I didn't hurt her," he said. "I just didn't want her family to find her like that." To detectives, though, that statement was enough. They believed the confession confirmed what they'd suspected all along. Kenneth was arrested and charged with murder. As soon as officers told him the charges, Kenneth's demeanor changed. He immediately tried to retract his confession. He told them he had only written what they wanted after being questioned for hours without a break. He said he was exhausted, confused, and desperate for it to end. According to Kenneth, detectives had pressured him relentlessly, telling him over and over that they already knew he was guilty, that all the evidence pointed to him, that a confession was his only way out. He said they told him that if he admitted to simply finding Andrea and wrote that version of events down, they would let him go home. Wanting the nightmare to stop, he agreed. But once the paper was signed, everything changed. His words, meant to bring relief, instead became the central piece of evidence used against him. Later, Kenneth also revealed that detectives had told him he failed the polygraph miserably, even though that wasn't true. They claimed to have solid forensic evidence connecting him to the scene, something that, in reality, did not exist. And then, another revelation came to light. Unknown to Kenneth during those long hours in the interrogation room, his grandfather had already hired an attorney. That lawyer had physically arrived at the police station, ready to help. The attorney immediately began making calls, trying to locate his new client. He phoned the police department, asking where Kenneth was being held and requesting to speak with him directly. Instead of cooperation, he was met with resistance. According to later reports, one of the detectives abruptly hung up the phone after realizing who was calling. Then, in a quiet moment away from the receiver, He warned his fellow officers not to reveal Kenneth's location to anyone, not even to the attorney who had been legally retained to represent him. Throughout that long day, the lawyer tried every possible route. He called station after station, leaving messages, sending faxes, and even reaching out to local court clerks for information. Yet every door seemed to close before him. No one would confirm where Kenneth was, or whether he was even allowed to receive visitors. Meanwhile, inside the station, Kenneth was completely unaware that anyone was fighting for him on the outside. He continued speaking to detectives alone, without legal guidance, answering their questions for hours. Exhausted and overwhelmed, he later said that his so-called confession wasn't a genuine admission. It was repetition. He claimed he merely echoed what detectives wanted to hear, thinking that if he said the right things, they would finally let him go home. He maintained that he hadn't known Andrea was gone, let alone that she had been harmed. Less than a full day after Andrea's body was discovered, the police publicly announced they had their suspect. The town was stunned. Reporters repeated the official statement. The case was solved, the killer was in custody, and justice would soon follow. Kenneth's family and friends, however, were in disbelief. Those who knew him described him as quiet, respectful, and incapable of violence. To them, the accusations felt impossible. But by that point, there was little anyone could do. With the confession on record, investigators slowed their efforts. Many leads were quietly set aside, and the once urgent search for new evidence appeared to fade. The case, in their eyes, was closed. But science had its own story to tell, and it did not agree with theirs. Forensic specialists began methodically examining the dozens of samples collected from the home. Every item, every trace, every fiber was cataloged. When they tested the biological material found under Andrea's fingernails, the results were startling. The DNA belonged to an unknown male, and crucially, it was not Kenneth's. That discovery should have prompted a re-examination of the case. Yet instead of reconsidering, detectives pressed forward. A few days later, they announced they had new physical evidence. A single hair, allegedly discovered on Kenneth's pants. The story of that hair would become one of the most controversial parts of the investigation. The clothing had been sealed and stored as evidence, yet one officer claimed to notice the hair only after reopening the bag. Tests later revealed that the hair and a trace of blood on it matched Andrea's DNA profile. At first, this seemed to strengthen the case against Kenneth. But when a forensic expert analyzed it closely, they reached a very different conclusion. The pattern of the blood and the condition of the hair showed no signs of the kind of splatter that would occur during a violent encounter. In fact, the expert said it was far more likely that the hair had been transferred after Andrea's death, perhaps when Kenneth visited the house earlier that week or through indirect contact. The result left a cloud of doubt hanging over the entire investigation. Legal battles followed for years. Motions were filed, hearings were delayed, and the question of whether Kenneth's confession should even be allowed in court dragged on. The defense argued it had been coerced. The prosecution insisted it was voluntary. For nearly 4 years, the issue remained unresolved. Finally, the court ruled in favor of the prosecution. The confession would stay in. It was a major blow to Kenneth's defense. While awaiting trial, Kenneth lived under strict supervision. He was released on bail, but his life was far from normal. A GPS monitor was strapped to his ankle, tracking every movement. He couldn't leave his house without prior approval from law enforcement. Even family gatherings or grocery runs required written permission. For a young man who had never been in trouble before, the restrictions felt like a cage. In 2015, 4 years after Andrea's death, the trial finally began. The courtroom was filled with quiet tension. Reporters in the back rows, family members in the front, everyone waiting to see what would unfold. The prosecution's case rested on 2 pillars: Kenneth's written confession and the bloody hair found on his pants. That was the foundation they believed would convince a jury. Their official theory was that Andrea had been killed during a robbery gone wrong. But the problem was that none of the stolen items ever turned up in Kenneth's possession. The missing objects, perfume, a sweater, small household items, were never found at his home, in his car, or anywhere connected to him. and the person who withdrew money from Andrea's account had clearly not been Kenneth. Surveillance footage showed someone else entirely, driving a different vehicle. To bridge the gaps, the prosecutor offered a new spin on the story. He suggested that Kenneth had staged the entire break-in to make it look like a robbery, claiming the motive was financial gain. But that theory quickly fell apart under scrutiny. Kenneth's family was financially comfortable, and he had no known money problems. There was simply no reason for him to commit a desperate crime. The prosecution also pointed to the fact that there were no signs of forced entry at the house. Kenneth, they reminded the jury, had a spare key. Andrea had given it to him only a few days before her death so he could stop by to visit or feed the pets while she was house-sitting. But Kenneth testified that he had left the key on a table in the living room 2 days before the tragedy. His friend, who had been with him that day, backed up the story completely. When investigators eventually searched the house again, they found the key exactly where Kenneth had said it would be, right on that same table. This discovery seriously weakened the claim that Kenneth had broken in. The prosecution countered yet again with a new theory. Perhaps, they suggested, Kenneth hadn't acted alone. Maybe an unknown accomplice had helped him, someone who took the stolen items, drove Andrea's car, and withdrew the cash. But this version of events only raised more questions. If Kenneth had an accomplice, who was it? Where was the evidence? And how could they prove it when the DNA under Andrea's nails belonged to a completely different person? Even more puzzling was the missing weapon. The firearm used in the crime was never located. Tests proved that the rifle taken from Andrea's uncle's home was not the weapon involved, nor did any gun owned by Kenneth's family match the ballistic evidence. Kenneth's lawyer seized on these inconsistencies. He accused detectives of developing tunnel vision from the very beginning, of locking onto Kenneth as their only suspect and refusing to consider anyone else. To drive the point home, the defense presented a list of 5 alternative suspects who, they argued, had stronger motives or unexplored connections to the case. At the top of that list was a man named Jeffrey, a mutual acquaintance of both Kenneth and Andrea. To start, Jeffrey was the one who just happened to locate Andrea's missing car in the early hours of the search. It was parked several miles away from her relative's home, tucked in a quiet, wooded area that few locals even knew about. Search volunteers had been scouring main roads and public parks, yet Jeffrey somehow drove straight to that exact spot. To some, it felt like an incredible stroke of luck. To others, something far more curious. Even more strangely, that same day, Jeffrey called Kenneth directly, asking him about Andrea's disappearance. Kenneth was startled. He had never given Jeffrey his number. Investigators later discovered how that connection might have been made. Andrea had jotted down Kenneth's phone number on a small slip of paper and left it on a nightstand at the house. That same nightstand later became one of the most significant pieces of physical evidence in the case, because a sample of unidentified male DNA had been found nearby. As the defense presented these details in court, it was clear they believed Jeffrey deserved much closer scrutiny. His connection to Andrea, his convenient discovery of her car, and his mysterious phone call all formed a pattern that could not easily be dismissed. While investigators initially brushed off Jeffrey as a dead end, another potential suspect soon emerged. David, a young man whose name came to the police through an unexpected source, his own father. According to official reports, David's father contacted law enforcement and told them he feared his son might have been involved in Andrea's death. David already had a lengthy record that included thefts and violent altercations, and, as it turned out, his physical appearance bore a striking resemblance to that of a serial killer resemblance to the man seen in the ATM footage using Andrea's card. But despite this, investigators concluded that they couldn't find any hard evidence linking him directly to the crime. The defense found this dismissal frustrating. To them, both Jeffrey and David represented leads that should have been explored further. But the investigation had long been focused elsewhere. When the trial reached its conclusion, emotions in the courtroom were heavy. Jurors listened to closing arguments from both sides, carefully reviewing the evidence, testimonies, and the still disputed confession. After 2 full days of deliberation, the jury returned with its decision. Kenneth was found guilty of first-degree murder and sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. The words hung in the air like a thunderclap. Kenneth's parents wept quietly, while his attorney immediately promised to appeal the verdict. For Kenneth, the outcome was devastating. For those who believed in his innocence, it felt like a miscarriage of justice. But legally, the case was closed, at least for the moment. The appeals process began almost immediately. Kenneth's lawyer first argued that his client's confession had been coerced. Those detectives had kept him isolated, denied him access to counsel, and pressured him until he broke down. The motion was forceful and detailed, but the court rejected it, ruling that the confession had been voluntary. The defense tried again, this time targeting the theft charge that had been tacked onto the case. Kenneth had been convicted of robbery despite the fact that none of the supposed stolen items were ever found in his possession. Still, the court declined to overturn that conviction. It wasn't until the third appeal that something finally shifted. Kenneth's attorney discovered a crucial error in the jury paperwork, a procedural mistake that, while simple, had enormous implications. On the verdict form, jurors were asked to consider both first-degree and second-degree murder. For the first-degree charge, they were given two options: guilty or not guilty. But for second-degree, there was only one box to check: guilty. In other words, the jury had no way to declare Kenneth innocent of second-degree murder. They were forced to choose between one level of guilt or another, which legally violated his right to a fair verdict. When this mistake was brought before the appeals court, judges could not ignore it. In 2018, Kenneth's conviction was overturned and a new trial was ordered. By then, he had already spent 3 long years behind bars. Once again, he was released on bail. Free, but not free at all. Kenneth's defense team refused to let the case fade into silence. His attorney began relentlessly pursuing forensic reviews, insisting that modern technology might uncover what older tests had missed. He filed repeated motions asking authorities to re-examine the original DNA evidence. For years, those requests went unanswered until finally, in 2022, investigators agreed to reopen the forensic file and conduct a full review. By that time, Kenneth's retrial still hadn't begun. He remained on bail, wearing an ankle monitor and living with uncertainty, waiting for the day the truth might finally come to light. The new forensic team retested every unidentified male DNA sample connected to the case. Once again, the national FBI database produced no matches, but one piece of evidence stood out: a cigarette butt found outside Andrea's relative's home. When analyzed, the DNA on that cigarette matched the same man whose skin cells had been discovered under Andrea's fingernails. It was the first definitive link pointing away from Kenneth and toward another individual entirely. That discovery changed everything. Investigators sent the sample to Othram, a cutting-edge lab specializing in forensic genetic genealogy, a field that uses family trees and public DNA databases to identify suspects through distant relatives. In January 2023, Othram scientists made a stunning announcement. They had identified a likely suspect. His name was Chadwick Mobley, a 42-year-old man who had never once appeared in the original investigation. Further research revealed that in 2011, at the time of Andrea's death, Mobley had been living just 40 minutes away in a nearby town. By early 2023, the long, cold mystery surrounding Andrea's death was on the verge of breaking wide open. Investigators had a name: Chadwick Mobley, and a mountain of genetic evidence pointing directly to him. But finding him wouldn't be easy. Over a decade had passed since the crime, and Mobley had built an entirely new life hundreds of miles away. He was living in Utah, working as a delivery driver and moving from place to place, often sleeping in the back of his van. He didn't stay long in one area, never rented a permanent home, and kept his circle small. For detectives, that made him a moving target. When Michigan authorities reached out to local police for assistance, they asked them to quietly collect something that could yield Mobley's DNA: a coffee cup, a discarded bottle, even a cigarette stub. But there was one major obstacle. Mobley was cautious. He parked in wide, open areas, often on public land or near rest stops where any attempt to follow him would be noticed. For 2 long months, officers watched, waited, and tracked his movements from a distance. They documented his daily habits when he drove, where he parked, which routes he favored. But despite all the surveillance, they never managed to recover a single item suitable for testing. Mobley, perhaps by instinct or sheer luck, left behind nothing that could be used to confirm his identity through DNA. Eventually, investigators decided that waiting any longer could risk losing him altogether. So, they chose to go straight to the source. Armed with a legal warrant, 2 detectives approached Chadwick outside his van one morning. Their tone was calm, professional. They told him they needed a DNA sample as part of an ongoing investigation. Mobley didn't resist. He handed over the sample without argument, but his reaction was telling. He seemed surprised at first, then detached, answering their questions politely but without emotion. When asked about Andrea, he denied ever knowing her, saying he had never been to Michigan. The detectives thanked him and left quietly. But the real test was yet to come. When the lab results came back, the findings were irrefutable. Chadwick Mobley's DNA wasn't just present at the scene, it was found in multiple locations connected to Andrea's final hours. During a search of his van, police found a revolver tucked beneath a loose panel. Ballistic tests matched it directly to the firearm used in Andrea's killing. After more than a decade of uncertainty, the weapon had finally been found, and it was in Chadwick Mobley's possession. Armed with overwhelming evidence, police prepared to arrest Mobley. But when they returned to his usual parking area 2 days later, his van was gone. He had vanished without a trace. According to investigators, Mobley had driven off shortly after that first conversation with officers. The manhunt stretched across several states. Detectives traced sightings, followed bank activity, and monitored highway cameras. It took nearly 3 weeks before they finally found him again, this time in Montana, not far from the Canadian border. As the evidence piled up, his defense attorneys negotiated with prosecutors, and in February 2025, Chadwick Mobley entered what's known as a no-contest plea. In court, Mobley stated that he had been heavily intoxicated on the night of the crime and claimed he couldn't remember what had happened. He didn't deny being involved, but he avoided giving direct answers about the details. The judge listened carefully, then handed down the final sentence: life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. The couple returned home a little early, around 1:45 a.m. The house at 1122 King Road was filled with sounds again: the clink of dishes, the rustle of footsteps, voices. No arguments, no signs of anxiety. Everything seemed ordinary. Kaylee and Maddie returned closer to 2 a.m., having used the food delivery service, and on the way took a short video near the front porch. The last recorded activity on their phones was around 3 a.m. These were the usual text messages, likes, short messages to friends. The clock was deep night. Silence fell in the house. The house seemed to be immersed in sleep. On the second and third floors, Kaylee, Maddie, Zana, and Ethan were sleeping. There were 2 more neighbors on the first floor who did not hear anything suspicious. As it turned out later, the doors were locked, the alarm did not go off, there were no signs of forced entry. This will create one of the main mysteries of the case. How did the intruder enter the house unnoticed? And how did he leave unnoticed? There will be no answer for a long time. Every crime has its own story, and we're here to tell it to you, our dear viewers. Like, comment, and subscribe. Stay with us. Idaho is a place where time seems to breathe slowly, where the rhythm of life flows like the quiet current of a mountain stream. The mornings here begin with mist over the pine forests, and the evenings end with the scent of rain and the hum of distant trains. It's a land of long roads, friendly greetings, and skies that seem wider than anywhere else. In this peaceful setting, crime stories rarely make headlines. The front pages are usually filled with local fairs, student events, and stories about the changing of the seasons. Amidst these calm hills and the gentle hum of everyday life, 4 young people once built a world of their own. A small, bright universe filled with laughter, plans, and dreams. They were ordinary students, yet their friendship made them unforgettable to everyone who knew them. Kaylee Goncalves, Madison Mogan, Zana Kernodle, and Ethan Chapin, names that would later echo far beyond their quiet college town, were, at that time, simply Kaylee, Maddie, Zana, and Ethan. Friends, classmates, neighbors. 4 lives moving side by side, as if destiny itself had drawn them together in that moment of youth when everything still seems possible. Their days were filled with the kind of happiness that feels simple yet precious. Study sessions that turned into late-night talks, coffee breaks that lasted for hours, and shared jokes that made stress disappear. They were young, energetic, and full of ideas about the future, each walking their own path but always finding time to support one another. Kaylee Gonkovs, 21, came from Rathdrum, a town in northern Idaho surrounded by lakes and forests. She grew up in a large, close-knit family that filled their home with warmth and laughter. Her loved ones often said she was driven by curiosity and fairness, traits that defined her even as a child. Kaylee had always been a girl who knew what she wanted. She dreamed not just of success, but of understanding the world and finding her place in it. Enrolling at the University of Idaho felt like a natural step for her, one more milestone on a road she had charted with determination. She studied information systems and marketing, excelling in her classes, but also in life outside them. Friends described her as emotional but level-headed, the kind of person who could both comfort and inspire. Kaylee's dorm room reflected her personality, organized, yet full of small touches of creativity. Postcards from places she planned to visit, sticky notes with goals and reminders, and books that mirrored her thoughtful nature. Just a few weeks before graduation, Kaylee had proudly bought her first car, a white Range Rover that, for her, symbolized independence. She kept a personal blog where she shared reflections on college life, her hopes for the future, and the challenges of growing up. Her posts were thoughtful and encouraging, filled with gratitude and humor. Her next big adventure was already mapped out, a long-awaited trip across Europe. The walls of her room were lined with maps, routes, and travel notes. To her, dreams were not just something to talk about. They were plans waiting to unfold. And at the center of many of those dreams was Madison Mogan, known to everyone as Maddie. Also 21, Maddie grew up in Coeur d'Alene, another charming town in northern Idaho, known for its lake and summer festivals. Her life intertwined with Kaylee's long before college. They met in 6th grade and became inseparable almost instantly. Their friendship was the kind that doesn't fade with time or distance. It was rooted in trust, shared experiences, and a mutual understanding that didn't need words. While Kaylee often radiated energy and determination, Maddie balanced her out with calm and thoughtfulness. She was known for her easy laugh and her ability to see good in people. Friends said that when Maddie walked into a room, she brought a sense of warmth and calm, as if the noise of the world softened for a moment. She studied marketing at the University of Idaho and worked at the popular Mad Greek Cafe, a small but lively spot that students loved for its friendly atmosphere and delicious food. Maddie had always been someone whose heart beat in rhythm with music. On weekends, she could be found near the stage at small campus concerts, her eyes closed, swaying gently to the sound of a local band. Friends often joked that she didn't just listen to music, she lived it. Her playlist was as diverse as her personality. One day, mellow indie songs, the next, vibrant pop anthems that made her dance around her room. She also possessed an extraordinary memory, the kind that made people smile in surprise. Maddie could recall small, almost forgotten moments from school. The color of a notebook cover, a joke whispered during a math test, or the exact day a friend first joined their circle. It wasn't just her sharp recall that impressed people, but the warmth behind it. Remembering these tiny details made everyone feel seen and valued. Her handwriting reflected her gentle spirit, smooth, rounded, and flowing across the page like a calm conversation. She loved creating handmade cards for birthdays, graduations, or simply just because. Each one was filled with thoughtful notes and decorated with tiny sketches, dried flowers, or stickers she'd collected over the years. Her creativity wasn't loud or showy. It was quiet, heartfelt, and sincere. Maddie was also deeply respected for her dedication. Professors saw her as one of those rare students who combined talent with discipline. She stayed late after class to refine projects, helped classmates struggling with presentations, and approached every challenge with patience. Her empathy drew people in. Even the shyest freshman found comfort opening up to her. She had a gift for conversation. She listened with genuine interest and made people feel they belonged. Her dream was to build a career in public relations, a field where she could combine her love for communication and her instinct for connection. Her teachers often mentioned that she had a natural talent for understanding people, a trait that would make her excel in any future role. Her bond with Kaylee went far beyond friendship. They didn't just share a home, they shared a rhythm of life. They had traditions, late-night cooking sessions, birthday surprises that turned into full-blown parties, spontaneous road trips, and matching tattoos that symbolized their unbreakable friendship. Together, they filmed video diaries, not for social media fame, but to capture moments they never wanted to forget. Their laughter could often be heard echoing through the halls, a sound that became part of the warmth of their home. Zana Kernodle, 20, originally from Avondale, Arizona, brought a bright desert energy to every room she entered. When her family moved to Idaho, she embraced the change with enthusiasm, quickly finding her place at the university. She studied marketing, balancing classes, a part-time job, and a vibrant social life with seemingly endless energy. Zana's friends often said her laugh was impossible to resist. If she laughed, everyone else joined in. She radiated positivity, and people gravitated toward her because she made ordinary moments feel special. She was a proud member of Pi Beta Phi, where she found sisterhood, support, and countless adventures. Her Instagram feed reflected her zest for life. Sunsets over mountain trails, spontaneous dance videos, cheerful selfies with her boyfriend Ethan, and pictures from weekend trips that showed her love for discovery. Even during stressful times, Zana never lost her composure. When exams piled up, she would text friends with a line that became her trademark. "I'll have time to rest after finals. Life doesn't pause." That kind of optimism inspired everyone around her. She had a talent for making spaces beautiful. Her room was her sanctuary, a blend of cozy textures, string lights, and carefully chosen colors. Whenever she felt the need for a change, she'd rearrange furniture until it felt just right. Interior design was her quiet passion, a way to bring comfort to chaos. Zana's independence was one of her defining qualities. She began earning her own money early, proud of every paycheck and what it represented: responsibility, freedom, and growth. She worked at the same cafe as Maddie, where regulars admired her quick smile and kind service. The cafe, often filled with music and conversation, became a small world of friendship that extended to their home on King Road. Together, they created an atmosphere that was always welcoming, filled with laughter, music, and the smell of freshly brewed coffee. Ethan Chapin, also 20, was studying sports management and was known as one of the friendliest faces on campus. Born and raised in Conway, Washington, he grew up in a close-knit family as one of triplets, a fact he mentioned often with pride and humor. He liked to joke that among the three of them, he was the calm and collected one, though his siblings would teasingly disagree. Ethan's presence was like sunlight, easygoing, steady, and full of warmth. His friends described him as the type of person who could turn any situation into something positive. Whether it was a group project or a pickup basketball game, Ethan's cheerful energy always lifted the mood. He had a natural love for sports, especially basketball, which had been part of his life since childhood. He wasn't just passionate about playing. He loved organizing games, mentoring younger players, and dreaming of managing large-scale sporting events in the future. At the university, Ethan met Zana, and from their very first conversation, something quietly clicked between them. They shared a sense of humor, a love for spontaneous plans, and an ability to find joy in the simplest things. That Saturday evening, Ethan decided to visit Zana at her place. It wasn't a special occasion, just another ordinary weekend, the kind that students look forward to after a busy week of classes and projects. Their circle of friends had a comforting routine: simple gatherings, laughter, shared meals, and endless stories that made time slip away unnoticed. The four friends, Kaylee, Maddie, Zana, and Ethan, were connected by more than just academics. They had built a little world of their own, one grounded in kindness, humor, and a shared belief that friendship means being present. Their home on King Road, a 3-level house nestled in a scenic part of Moscow, Idaho, reflected their personalities. It was large and full of life. Laughter spilling from the kitchen, music floating through open windows, lights glowing well past midnight. The balconies overlooked trees that swayed in the evening breeze, and the surrounding streets were familiar with the sound of students walking home under the soft glow of streetlights. The house had a reputation among the student community, not for wildness, but for warmth. It was known as a gathering spot, a home that radiated welcome. There were stories of pancake breakfasts on Sundays, dogs running in the yard, and impromptu movie nights that turned into heart-to-heart conversations. To neighbors and friends, the house on King Road represented the best of college life, a safe, joyful space where laughter often drowned out the worries of the outside world. On Saturday night, November 12th, 2022, the town of Moscow carried its usual calm rhythm. The week was ending, and the atmosphere around the University of Idaho campus buzzed softly with weekend energy. The semester was nearing its close, and students felt that mix of fatigue and freedom that comes before finals. A few parties, a few late-night study breaks, and a sense of youth unhurried. That night, Kaylee Goncalves and Madison Mogan decided to head out together. They made their way to a local favorite, the Corner Club, a familiar student bar that had become almost a second living room for many. The place was small but full of character. Cozy lighting, familiar faces, and an air of easy comfort. Kaylee and Maddie stayed from around 10 p.m. until close to 1:30 a.m., chatting, laughing, and enjoying the weekend. CCTV footage from that evening later showed them in moments of light-hearted conversation, laughing, sharing inside jokes, and simply being young and carefree. There was nothing unusual about their demeanor, no shadow of concern. The footage captured what everyone who knew them remembered best. Two close friends, radiant with life and friendship, moving through the night with confidence and calm. Meanwhile, Zana and Ethan were at a party at the Sigma Chi fraternity house, just a short walk from campus. The event was typical for a Saturday. Upbeat music, conversation spilling onto the porch, and the hum of celebration in the air. They greeted friends, exchanged smiles, and enjoyed the evening. To those around them, they looked happy and relaxed, perfectly at ease in each other's company. The couple returned home a little early, around 1:45 a.m. The house at 1122 King Road was filled with sounds again. The clink of dishes, the rustle of footsteps, voices. No arguments, no signs of anxiety. Everything seemed ordinary. Kaylee and Maddie returned closer to 2 a.m., having used the food delivery service, and on the way took a short video near the front porch. The last recorded activity on their phones was around 3 a.m. These were the usual text messages, likes, short messages to friends. The clock was deep night. Silence fell in the house. The house seemed to be immersed in sleep. On the second and third floors, Kaylee, Maddie, Zaina, and Ethan were sleeping. There were two more neighbors on the first floor who did not hear anything suspicious. As it turned out later, the doors were locked, the alarm did not go off, there were no signs of forced entry. This will create one of the main mysteries of the case. How did the intruder enter the house unnoticed? And how did he leave unnoticed? There will be no answer for a long time. While the campus was slowly waking up on Sunday, November 13th, the house on King Road remained unusually quiet. There was no movement, no phone calls, no one leaving the house. This alarmed one of the neighbors who lived on the first floor. She said that she heard some noise, perhaps rustling, but in her half-sleep she did not pay attention to it. Other neighbors began to notice oddities. The dog that Kaylee often walked was left in the house, and the door to the girl's room was ajar. Friends tried to call one of the residents. The phones did not answer. The anxiety began to grow. Around midday, one of the girls living on the first floor called the police. The reason was an unusual smell and no response from her friends. She called her friends, then her parents, and finally, in growing panic, she dialed 911. The call came in at 11:58 a.m. Within minutes, a patrol car pulled up to the house. Ahead of the officers was a scene that would, in a matter of hours, destroy the peace not only of the campus but of the entire country. The officers entered through the front door. Inside, there was an eerie silence. No signs of a struggle, no panic. It was as if the house had frozen in an instant. The rooms were in order, personal belongings were in place. But on the second and third floors, the officers found bodies. 4 bodies. Among them were Kaylee, Maddie, Zaina, and Ethan. There were no signs of forced entry, belongings were untouched, and the weapon used in the crime was not found. The officers, surveying the scene for the first time, were in for a real shock. The first body was found in a room on the second floor. It was Zana Kernodle. Next to her was Ethan Chapin. Visually, it was clear that the attack had happened suddenly. On the third floor, in a separate bedroom, were Kaylee Gonsalves and Madison Mogan. They were close friends, and they often spent the night in the same room. Experts noted that the girls were most likely sleeping at the time of the attack. There were no signs of an active struggle. This may indicate that the attack on them occurred unexpectedly and at high speed. An important item was also found in the room, a sheath from a so-called tactical knife. The crime seemed lightning fast, almost invisible. There were no one ran outside. The calculation, time, and place were chosen with precision. And what especially worried the investigators, so far there was not a single suspect, not a single clue indicating a motive. 4 lives were taken in one night, but the questions that followed that morning never abated. It began a massive, intense phase of what would soon become one of the most complex and controversial investigations in Idaho history. And the public, parents, friends, and millions of people around the world waited in suspense. Who did this? And why? Sunday, November 13th, 2022 was the starting point. After the bodies of 4 students were discovered in a home on King Road, the silence of Idaho was replaced by a dull echo of alarm. Police immediately launched an investigation, but the first press conference held just hours after the call raised more questions than it answered. Police officials said there was no threat to society, but they did not provide details. 4 young men had been murdered in their beds, but how, by whom, when, and why remained a mystery. In the first days, when investigators had neither a suspect nor a motive, the fight began not only for justice, but also for the truth. Local residents and especially students began to panic. Rumors and conspiracy theories spread on social media. Some accused acquaintances, others suspected random passers-by. Tension reigned on campus. Students went home, classes were canceled. Even the city's mayor admitted that the city had never experienced such a crisis of trust in the authorities. And all this, against the backdrop of the absence of an obvious suspect. Investigators reported only that the murders were targeted, not random. This only reinforced the feeling that the perpetrator knew the victims, or one of them. The house was sealed off. An investigative team of more than 100 police officers, the FBI and forensic experts began to analyze every detail. The first evidence was footage from surveillance cameras, local street recorders, and video intercoms. Particularly valuable were the footage that recorded the movements of the girls, Kaylee and Maddie, that night. The call stream from their phones was also studied. One of the last outgoing calls made from Kaylee's phone at about 2:26 a.m. was a call to her ex-boyfriend. He did not answer. This attracted the attention of the press, but the investigation quickly excluded him from the list of suspects. The couple had recently broken up, but remained on friendly terms. After the bodies of the 4 students were removed from the King Road home and transported to the Latah County Medical Examiner's office, work began on what is known as the most difficult part of any criminal case, reconstructing the last minutes of life. Pathologists, forensic scientists, and biologists worked in strict confidentiality. Given the scale and resonance of the tragedy, every detail, every millimeter of the wound mattered. The manner in which the blows were inflicted, The position of the bodies and the marks left on the skin and clothing could provide clues to everything from the killer's profile to a possible motive. The weapon, as experts later determined, was likely a factory-made tactical knife of the Ka-bar type, the kind used by both the military and hunters. One of the first big findings was that the attack was not chaotic but methodical. Traces of foreign DNA material were found on the victim's clothing and skin, including microscopic traces of skin and sweat. However, the key discovery was the sheath left near Madison's body. A single male DNA was found on the interior latch button, which did not belong to any of the victims or any of the residents. The DNA sample was too small for immediate search in the federal CODIS database, but was suitable for matching on genetic matching services. Analysis of microparticles recovered from under Zana and Madison's fingernails provided another clue: traces of a nylon material similar to gloves. This suggested that the killer had likely used protection to avoid leaving fingerprints. However, one microscopic error, the abandoned sheath, was the beginning of the end of this cold, calculated attack. Finally, it was determined that all of the victims had died before the police arrived, and none of them had a chance of surviving their injuries. These findings formed the basis for a warrant and a charge of premeditated murder, since expert opinion ruled out an accident, self-defense, or acting in passion. This was a planned, cold crime. One of the key discoveries was the analysis of cell phone data in the area of the house. Investigators determined that at around 3:30 a.m., a phone had been spotted near the crime scene that had been previously recorded in the area. This raised suspicion. Registration data for vehicles parked nearby was examined, and one of the cars, a white Hyundai Elantra with no license plates in place of the dashboard, became the focus of interest. The following weeks were marked by silence from the investigation and constant pressure from the public. The parents of the victims, especially the families of Kaylee and Maddie, actively interacted with the press, criticizing the slowness of the investigation. They gave interviews, organized public events, raised the issue of external surveillance of the case. Their pain and anger were understandable. Almost 2 months had passed, and there was still no official suspect. Meanwhile, DNA analysis collected at the crime scene continued. In early December, the investigation made a breakthrough. Using a combination of digital traces, cell phone data, and surveillance cameras, detectives began tracking the path of a white Hyundai Elantra. The car, as it turned out, was registered in another state, Pennsylvania. And the name of the owner, who turned out to be a graduate student in criminology at Washington State University, literally 15 minutes from Idaho, dramatically changed the course of the case. His name was Brian Kohberger. Kohberger was a 28-year-old student with an academic interest in the psychology of crime, studying serial killer profiles and actively participating in online discussions on forensic forums. He even posted questionnaires asking convicted criminals about their feelings during the crime. His name first came to the attention of investigators when his cell phone data showed abnormal activity. He had been in the area of the victim's home on multiple occasions in the weeks leading up to the tragedy. Particularly suspicious was the phone's route on the night of the crime. It would turn off at a certain time, then turn back on. Far from Idaho. The pieces began to fall into place. A car, cell phone data, DNA found on a knife sheath found near the body of one of the girls. This DNA did not match any of the victims and was not previously in the database, but after searching genetic databases through family connections, it was matched to a member of Brian's family. This became the basis for an arrest warrant. On the night of December 30th, 2022, almost 7 weeks after the crime, the FBI and local law enforcement detained Kohberger at his parents' home in Pennsylvania. He did not resist. During a search of his car and personal belongings, items were found that would later become part of the evidence: latex gloves, a black mask, a computer with encrypted correspondence. All of this still required examination, but the puzzle began to take shape. It was a shock to the public. A quiet, outwardly unremarkable student with excellent grades, working as a professor's assistant, turned out to be a suspect in the brutal murder of 4 people. And although many questions remained unanswered, for the first time in weeks, the investigation gave the public what everyone was waiting for: a name. But there was a trial ahead. A trial that was supposed to not only prove the guilt or innocence of the suspect, but also try to answer the main question: why? When the suspect's name became public, the city, and with it the entire country, shuddered. It was Brian Kochberger, a 28-year-old graduate student in criminology at Washington State University, located just 15 minutes from the crime scene. Calm, disciplined, with an emphatically intellectual manner of communication, he had not previously come to the attention of law enforcement. But it was his DNA that matched the sample found on the scabbard. Analysis of genetic databases and then direct comparison with biomaterials taken from family members led the investigation to Brian. The arrest took place on December 30th, 2022, in the suspect's parental home in Pennsylvania. He did not resist. During interrogations after extradition, Kochberger remained silent, exercising his right not to testify without a lawyer. The first court hearing was held in a tense atmosphere. The courtroom included relatives of the victims, students, and journalists. When the prosecution read out 4 counts of first-degree murder and 1 count of criminal trespass, Kochberger simply nodded. He pleaded not guilty. Kochberger's attorneys immediately made their position clear. They intend to demand that evidence be excluded, citing the alleged violations of DNA collection. In addition, the defense questioned the legality of the surveillance that was conducted on their client for several weeks before his arrest. But despite the defense's efforts, the prosecution was ready. Over the months of investigation, a large amount of material was collected. Data from video cameras, records of the suspect's phone movements, surveillance of the Hyundai Elantra, the history of internet searches, as well as testimony from experts in behavioral criminology. One of the key pieces of evidence was the movement of a car that coincided in time and route with the alleged time and place of the crime. Cameras recorded a white Hyundai Elantra driving near the house on King Road on the night of the murders. The car would later be registered in Kochberger's name. The suspect's phone, according to operators, was switched off on the night of the murders for exactly the period of time when the attack took place and was activated again when the car left the area. Prosecutors said, this was not an accident, but an attempt to hide a digital trail. Particular attention was paid to Kochberger's behavior before and after the crime. Phrases like, "How long does DNA traces last?" "How to commit murder without getting caught," were found in his search queries, as well as an interest in other high-profile cases. On forums related to criminology, he had previously left comments on behalf of a graduate student studying the behavior of killers. Initially, these posts were perceived as part of the training, but later they began to be viewed in a new light. The prosecution built its argument around the thesis of premeditation. The prosecutor presented a timeline according to which Kochberger watched the house at least 12 times in the weeks before the crime. His phone, according to operators, was recorded in the area of King Road at different times of the day. This, according to the investigation, indicated a targeted study of the routes, habits, and routines of the residents of the house. Brian's behavior after the murder was also of particular importance. According to the FBI, within a week he changed his lifestyle. He began to avoid social networks, spent more time at home, and then went to his parents in another state. It was there that investigators seized trash in which DNA was found that matched the material found on the sheath. This sample was the decisive link in the indictment. However, the defense tried to refute the evidence, pointing to the lack of direct witnesses, the absence of a murder weapon, and the fact that the DNA on the sheath was single and could have gotten there in another way. According to the lawyers, the evidence was not reliable enough to convict. They insisted that their client's behavior was within the normal range for a criminology student studying real cases. But another important fact was heard in the courtroom. One of the surviving neighbors said that on the night of the murder, she saw a figure in black clothes with a mask walking past her room. According to her, the figure moved quietly, did not say a word, and disappeared into the silence. Later, she described the person's build and height, and these parameters matched Kochberger's appearance. The trial lasted for months. The public closely followed each hearing. The families of the victims gave short but emotional statements, stressing that their children did not deserve this fate. The prosecution built a coherent picture, a carefully planned nighttime attack with the intent to kill. The defense tried to sow doubt, but it was not enough. Eventually, the jury retired to deliberate. They were gone for several hours. Then the chief judge returned to the courtroom and read the verdict. Brian Cockburger was found guilty on all counts, 4 counts of premeditated murder and criminal trespass. When the judge asked him for a closing statement, Cockburger, as he had throughout the trial, remained silent. He showed no remorse, gave no explanation, and made no apology. The court sentenced him to 4 life sentences without parole. Thus ended a trial that was one of the most high-profile in recent years. But for the families of the victims, it was not a victory. It was an ending that did not feel justified. And yet they left the courtroom with the knowledge that the killer of their children would never. John had wanted to bring some leftover food from the restaurant to Jeff, thinking his friend was still at the office working late. The two of them arrived at the building just before 10 o'clock that night. They both went inside together. John greeted Jeff warmly and chatted with him for a short while Judy located the notebook she had come to pick up. Once she found it, she headed back outside and settled into the driver's seat of the car to wait. A few minutes passed. Then John left the office and began walking back toward the vehicle. He opened the rear door on the driver's side, perhaps looking for something he had forgotten earlier. Suddenly, the stillness of the night was broken. 2 sharp, piercing sounds rang out across the quiet parking lot. Quick, unmistakable, and terrifying. John collapsed to the ground. Moments later, the 911 emergency center received 2 separate calls, one from Judy, her voice panicked and trembling, and another from Jeff. Dear viewers, thank you for choosing our video and our channel. We put a lot of effort into making sure you enjoy being with us. Little is known about the early life of John Parker, and the fragments that do exist paint only the faintest outline of who he was before he became a figure of local reputation. What is mentioned in passing is that he was born in 1970, somewhere in the quiet suburbs of Indiana, into a middle-class household where routine, responsibility, and modest ambitions were the norm. He grew up with at least one sibling, and although their family life was not glamorous, it was steady enough to give John the foundation he needed to dream bigger. Even as a boy, he displayed a certain restlessness, an entrepreneurial spark that set him apart from children his age. People who knew him described him as someone always tinkering with ideas, looking for ways to earn pocket money, and imagining a future in which he would not simply work for others, but carve out his own path toward independence and continuous self-improvement. That desire to take on the world, as his brother later put it, was something he carried into adulthood. So it came as no surprise to those around him that immediately after finishing high school, John wasted no time searching for employment. According to his brother, his first job was that of a waiter's assistant in a local restaurant. Yet the position did not last long. For reasons never fully explained, perhaps frustration, youthful impatience, or a simple mismatch of expectations, John became upset while at work and abruptly quit. This episode, however, did not curb his ambition. If anything, it only strengthened his determination to find the kind of work where his drive and enthusiasm could flourish rather than be stifled. Soon enough, John found himself stepping into the world of direct sales, taking on a role as a door-to-door salesman for Kirby vacuum cleaners. It was rigorous work, demanding long hours, often 12 to 16 hours a day, and requiring him to knock on unfamiliar doors, deliver energetic presentations, and handle rejection with grace. But this environment turned out to be exactly the type of challenge John thrived in. His persistence paid off as he quickly rose to become one of the company's leading salesmen. His achievements were often highlighted at meetings, and beyond the numbers he produced, he became a source of inspiration for other salespeople. Many saw him not only as a colleague, but as a mentor whose techniques, energy, and confidence set a standard others wanted to emulate. It was during this period that John met Judy, a 20-year-old young woman who had been born in Texas in October 1969. She grew up in a low-income household with 2 siblings and learned early in life to rely on her outgoing personality to navigate hardships. Although John was not actively looking to expand his sales team at that moment, Judy approached him with striking confidence. She insisted she would be an exceptional addition to the group, and her determination made an impression. Despite her youth, She carried herself like someone who had lived through much and had grown stronger because of it. With her parents' early permission, she had married at 14 and later went through a divorce. Experiences that shaped her maturity and resilience long before she entered Kirby's world. Seeing her resolve, John chose to give Judy a chance. He became her trainer and guide in the craft of vacuum cleaner sales. Judy quickly proved her worth, not only fitting into the team he led, but becoming one of its energetic driving forces. In time, she also won something far more personal: John's heart. Their professional partnership evolved into a romantic relationship, and for a while, John felt that life had aligned perfectly. He had a thriving reputation as a skilled salesman and trainer, and Judy provided steady support both at work and at home. With confidence built from years of success, John decided to start his own business in Michigan, becoming an official sales and service operator for Kirby. He expanded his role beyond sales, offering training sessions where he shared the techniques and mindset that helped him excel. His operation quickly became recognized as one of the strongest in the region. John often credited Judy for this success, openly acknowledging that her encouragement and partnership were integral to everything they achieved. By 1992, with their professional lives on solid ground, John and Judy married. Over the following years, they worked tirelessly to demonstrate what dedication in the sales world could accomplish. Together, they welcomed 2 daughters, Tiffany and Erica, bringing the total number of children in their blended household to 4. The family moved several times, each relocation marking an upgrade to a better home, better neighborhood, and better schools. The children enjoyed opportunities built from John and Judy's commitment to long hours and constant effort. At first, John got along well with Judy's children from her previous marriage. Christina, the older one, was a gentle and affectionate girl, while Daniel was energetic and mischievous but still likable. The Parker home became a place of comfort and stability. They owned high-end cars, enjoyed frequent vacations, and lived a lifestyle that reflected John's rising success. Proud of what he had achieved, John would often use his own story as motivation for young salespeople he trained, showing them the possibilities that opened through perseverance and discipline. However, as Judy's children grew into their teenage years, challenges emerged. Christina began spending time with peers who displayed poor behavior, and her choices often worried the family. Meanwhile, Daniel, who was 14 at the time, seemed to drift in the wrong direction as well, frequently appearing frustrated and surrounding himself with friends who encouraged his impulsive decisions. Problems escalated one day when Daniel, while hanging out with a group of teens, took John's car without permission and drove around the neighborhood. In the process, he accidentally destroyed several mailbox posts. Determined to prevent the situation from becoming a legal issue for the boy, John went door to door the following day, personally compensating each homeowner for their damaged property. Around the same period, John was contacted by Daniel's school regarding concerns about the boy's behavior, reinforcing the sense that something in their family dynamic was beginning to shift. Still, John continued trying to strike a balance between discipline and support, hoping the challenges would pass as the teens matured. After 9 years together, Judy decided it was time for her family to reconnect with her roots. She brought them all to Texas so they could see the humble environment where she had grown up and meet one of her brothers, who still lived in the area. During this trip, Judy confided in her brother with a tone of frustration that her marriage was falling apart and that she felt John treated her children unfairly. To those listening, the story sounded one-sided, but Judy truly believed she was defending her family. In reality, she had long stopped acknowledging that her older children were slipping into troubling behavior. Instead of addressing their issues, she justified their actions and placed the blame on John, which only increased the tension inside their already fragile household. What had once been a bustling and lively home now resembled a pressure cooker, a place where every disagreement added heat until the atmosphere felt ready to burst. And just when things seemed as though they could not get worse, John's suspicions about Judy's loyalty began to grow. He worried she might be involved with one of the employees at his company. True to his nature, John was never someone who simply sat with uncertainty. He approached problems directly, sometimes too directly. Wanting clarity and unwilling to rely on intuition alone, he installed discreet cameras around the office. It took time, but eventually he obtained the confirmation he feared, a recording that validated his growing concerns. The discovery shook John to his core. A man known for his enthusiasm, humor, and magnetic leadership suddenly became distant and volatile. The shift in his personality was visible to everyone around him. He began drinking more frequently, not to celebrate success, as he once had, but to numb the sense of betrayal that consumed him. His employees noticed his temper, clients sensed his distraction, and Judy felt the heavy change in the home. Even routine conversations became strained, filled with tension that neither of them could seem to dissolve. Hoping to put distance between his wife and the man he believed she had grown too close to, John made a decision he thought would save their marriage. He relocated the family to an upscale neighborhood in Crown Point, Indiana. He hoped the change of environment could offer a reset. John still loved Judy deeply, and the move reflected the part of him that believed their relationship could still be repaired. But despite his efforts, improvement didn't follow. Judy, perhaps seeking confidence or a fresh identity, began focusing heavily on her appearance. Losing weight, updating her wardrobe, and reinventing her style. John, on the other hand, fell even deeper into his emotional spiral. He stopped shaving, began smoking, dressed only in worn jeans, and often drifted through the day in a fog of stress and sadness. The business he had built with so much dedication suffered alongside him. Productivity declined, morale dropped, and finances began to crumble. Eventually, he was forced to sell his beloved boat just to keep the company afloat. In the midst of this decline, rumors rippled through the workplace. Whispers that Judy might also be involved with Jeff, John's trusted right-hand man. No one knew whether the gossip was true, but the speculation alone was enough to spark new arguments and deepen existing wounds. Tensions reached a new level when Judy informed John she wanted a divorce. But for John, separation was not a simple matter. He felt he had invested everything into their life together. His finances, his time, his loyalty, and even his willingness to embrace her children as his own. He believed he had lifted her from hardship, provided her with comfort, and done everything within his power to give their family stability. Feeling that all of this was being dismissed, anger clouded his judgment. He reacted by cutting off Judy's access to money and insisted that if she chose to leave, she would walk away with nothing. And as a final leverage point, he held onto the recording that had confirmed his earlier suspicions. This was the state of their family as 2003 began, a year that promised no peace. Even the children seemed to reflect the rising chaos in the household. Over the holidays, Tiffany was grounded after she and a friend started a small fire on school property, an incident that added yet another layer of stress to the already fragile situation. The relentless arguments finally came to a pause on Thursday, April 17, 2003. That evening, John and Judy went out to dinner at a restaurant, perhaps hoping to find common ground or at least calm the storm for a moment. After finishing their meal, they called home to check on the children and told them they would return soon. During the call, Christina asked if they could stop by the office to retrieve a school notebook she had left behind. Wanting to help, John and Judy agreed. Leaving the restaurant, they drove to the company headquarters located in a quiet industrial area. John also wanted to bring leftover food from the restaurant to Jeff, who he believed was still working late. They arrived at the office just before 10 p.m. Both stepped inside. John greeted Jeff and spoke with him briefly while Judy found the notebook and then walked back to the car waiting in the driver's seat. A few minutes later, John exited the office and walked toward the vehicle. He opened the rear door on the driver's side, perhaps searching for something he had left earlier. Then, in an instant, the calm of the night was shattered. Two sharp, startling sounds echoed through the empty lot, and John collapsed onto the pavement. Within moments, the 911 center received two separate calls, one from Judy, panicked and breathless, and one from Jeff. Emergency responders arrived quickly, as is standard in such situations. Despite their efforts, John, only 33 years old, was pronounced deceased at the scene. The sudden loss sent a shock through everyone who knew him. When investigators questioned Judy, she appeared shaken and overwhelmed. She explained that she had been sitting in the car, waiting for her husband to finish his conversation with Jeff. According to her account, John opened the back door, and immediately she heard the sounds from outside. Frightened, she ducked down instinctively, shielding herself with the seat. When she finally dared to lift her head, she caught only a fleeting glimpse of what seemed to be a figure dressed in dark clothing moving swiftly away from the car John's wallet was missing, which at first glance made the situation appear to be a straightforward robbery. But as investigators examined the scene with greater precision, doubts began to form almost immediately. Nothing about the location, the circumstances, or the behavior of the supposed perpetrator aligned with a typical street-level theft. The incident took place in an isolated industrial area where few people ever passed through at night, raising a critical question: who would choose such an inconvenient, deserted place to carry out a random crime? And more importantly, how would a potential assailant even know that John and Judy were going to stop at the office that evening? The more the detectives studied the surroundings, the more the theory of an ordinary robbery began to fall apart. If a thief had intended to steal valuables, why target the wallet first when John was clearly wearing an expensive $20,000 gold Rolex and several pieces of visible jewelry that could have been taken in seconds? And why would the person behind the attack immediately resort to violence rather than demanding valuables or attempting any form of verbal confrontation? Another detail puzzled the investigators. The pockets were never searched thoroughly, something even inexperienced criminals usually do during a theft. Instead of answers, every discovery only produced more questions, pushing detectives to consider the possibility that the incident had been staged to look like something it was not. 2 spent casings were found on the pavement, precisely matching Judy's statement that she heard 2 sharp sounds. As for the second, authorities released no specific details, leaving room only for speculation. But what mattered most at this stage was that the sequence of events corroborated the timing described by both Judy and Jeff. With unanswered questions accumulating, investigators moved quickly. Judy, as the only nearby witness, became their first interview. She explained that sometime earlier, her husband had a heated argument with a disgruntled employee and identified this individual by name. However, aside from this claim, Judy repeated much of what she had already stated the night of the incident and provided little additional information. Jeff, who had been inside the office at the time, could only say that he heard the noises and rushed outside, finding that everything had already happened. Meanwhile, officers contacted the Parker family residence. Christina answered the phone and was informed of her stepfather's passing, an exchange that added another emotional layer to the already tense atmosphere. With robbery now unlikely, detectives shifted their focus to people within John's circle, beginning with the employee Judy had mentioned. The man confirmed the argument but insisted that the conflict had been resolved peacefully. His alibi was checked thoroughly and proved legitimate, eliminating him from immediate suspicion. The investigation expanded dramatically from there. Detectives interviewed nearly everyone connected to John: business partners, former and current employees, neighboring competitors, even longtime friends and extended relatives. Yet despite the volume of interviews, no substantial lead emerged. The only mildly suspicious element was the somewhat close rapport between Judy and the company's general manager. But even this could not be developed into anything conclusive. Observers later commented heavily on Judy's demeanor during John's funeral. Instead of displaying grief or withdrawal, she appeared unusually cheerful, moving from conversation to conversation like she was hosting a gathering rather than attending a somber farewell. Adding to the strange atmosphere, her ex-husband, the father of her 2 older children, sat comfortably in a corner, calmly reading a newspaper, as though nothing extraordinary had happened. These behaviors, while not incriminating by themselves, stood out to many attendees and were quietly noted by investigators as potentially relevant to the emotional climate of the family. 4 days after John's death, authorities brought Daniel, Judy's teenage son, in for questioning. Months earlier, police had received a troubling report from a group of local youths who said Daniel had paid them to harm his stepfather. They admitted they never intended to go through with it and had simply kept the money. At the time, police had confiscated the money, filed documentation, and dismissed the story as unreliable. But now, in light of the recent tragedy, the investigators reevaluated the possibility that Daniel might have played a far more serious role during his interrogation. Daniel openly admitted that he had indeed offered money to individuals to carry out a harmful act against John. His confession prompted officers to detain one of the teens Daniel had supposedly hired. However, after verifying his alibi, the youth was cleared. Daniel himself, though technically confessing to making arrangements, could not be tied to the actual incident at the office. With insufficient evidence and considering his minor status, he was released after 9 days of questioning. This line of inquiry brought renewed attention to the broader family dynamic. Investigators soon learned that John's relationship with Judy's older children had been deteriorating for some time. This led detectives to question Christina, who was 18. She denied any involvement completely, although earlier incidents suggested she, like Daniel, had expressed hostility toward John. Once again, the alleged plans failed to link to the event at the office, but the repeated theme of conflict within the family could no longer be ignored. Detectives began to wonder where the teenagers, neither of whom had steady income, were getting funds to initiate these harmful plans. The only logical possibility was Judy. This shifted investigators' focus onto her more intensely, especially as additional details surfaced about the fractured marriage. Sources familiar with the couple confirmed that their relationship had been deeply strained during the months leading to John's death. There were also reports of at least one instance of infidelity involving Judy, though opinions varied on the seriousness of the situation. Despite everything, those closest to John insisted that he had no intention of ending the marriage. He believed that the difficulties they were facing were temporary and continued searching for ways to repair their increasingly fragile bond. The most compelling motive investigators identified for why Judy might have targeted her husband was financial gain. During the examination of the couple's finances, detectives discovered that John had taken out not just one, but 2 substantial life insurance policies, together totaling $1 million. These policies were meant to provide long-term protection for the family. Yet only days after John's passing, Judy attempted to file a claim to collect the payout. The insurance company, however, declined to release the funds, explaining that the circumstances of John's death were still under investigation. Suspicion also deepened when John's father voiced his belief that Judy might have played a direct role in his son's fate. His objections added another layer of complexity, as the company placed the claim on hold pending further findings. Despite these early indicators and multiple promising threads, the investigation began to lose momentum. Detectives found themselves with nothing more than circumstantial evidence, pieces that hinted at wrongdoing but could not legally tie anyone to the crime. As the case stalled and official progress slowed, life continued within the Parker household, though it took on a very different shape. Judy was rarely present at home, often away for long stretches of time. According to acquaintances, she was spending much of her time with Jeff, the company's general manager and a man John had once trusted deeply. With Judy increasingly absent, responsibility for the younger girls, Tiffany and Erica, fell onto their older siblings. In the months that followed, the already fractured family splintered further. Judy and Jeff eventually made the decision to move out of state, taking John's young daughters with them. Daniel, meanwhile, went to live with his biological father. Christina, the eldest, remained in the family home, now pregnant and living with her boyfriend. The once stable Parker home had dissolved into a series of separate lives moving in different directions. Even though the main investigation seemed frozen, the authorities did not close the case. Detectives periodically pulled the files, hoping time and distance might bring new clarity. Their patience paid off when a fresh lead surfaced. Acting on this new information, investigators questioned several of Christina's and Daniel's former schoolmates. The teens revealed that they had sold Christina and Daniel a firearm sometime earlier, an admission that immediately reignited investigative interest. Following this lead, authorities turned their attention to a piece of rural land owned by the family where Christina was known to practice shooting. Detectives visited the property, methodically searched the area, and recovered several spent casings. These were sent to the laboratory for detailed analysis. The results were startling. The casings from the property matched those found at the scene of John's killing. This breakthrough shifted the case from speculation to something far more concrete. Then, in 2007, a new piece of information emerged through an unexpected source. A narcotics officer, who had been building a separate case involving Christina's ex-boyfriend, passed along a statement made by the young man seeking leniency. He shared a conversation he claimed to have overheard involving Judy. In that exchange, Judy allegedly stated that it was her son, Daniel, who had been the one responsible for firing the shot that ended John's life. This revelation immediately prompted investigators to bring Christina back in for questioning. Now 21 years old and linked to the weapon used in the crime, Christina quickly began to talk once confronted with the evidence. She admitted to purchasing the firearm and confessed that she had called her parents on the night of John's death, asking them to stop by the office because she had forgotten her homework. This call, she explained, was not accidental. It was part of a coordinated plan to lure John to the location. She further revealed that both she and her younger brother Daniel had actively participated in planning the attack. With Daniel designated as the one who would carry out the act, Daniel, then 19, was located in Arizona and taken into custody. When faced with the overwhelming combination of ballistics evidence and his sister's confession, he admitted openly to being the one who caused John's death. However, he insisted that the driving force behind the plan was not himself, but their mother, Judy. According to Daniel, Judy had been the one who orchestrated the plan, encouraging the siblings to participate and providing the financial support necessary to recruit assistance. Daniel revealed that Judy had forged company checks to gather $7,500, money intended to hire individuals to harm John. The hired group took the money but never followed through. When that plan failed, Judy allegedly directed the funds toward purchasing the firearm that Daniel used. Daniel also stated that the idea to call the house with a fabricated story about forgotten homework had come directly from Judy. This was meant to create a natural pretext for getting John to the office that night without raising suspicion. The siblings maintained that their mother had manipulated them emotionally, gradually convincing them that harming John was the only solution to the family's problems. Investigators also uncovered claims that this had not been Judy's first attempt to harm her husband. According to Daniel and Christina, she had previously tried to tamper with John's food during dinner, an act that resulted in John being hospitalized briefly with what was initially believed to be food poisoning. By the end of 2007, both Christina and Daniel were formally charged with conspiracy and murder-related offenses. Christina pleaded not guilty to the conspiracy charges and was eventually released on bail in March 2008. While awaiting further proceedings, Daniel, now 20, chose to accept a deal, pleading guilty to conspiracy and agreeing to testify against his mother. In exchange, prosecutors agreed not to pursue the more severe charge of murder. Even with the deal, Daniel faced a significant sentence of 20 to 25 years. Facing the unavoidable consequences of the years-long investigation, Judy reached a point where denial was no longer an option. In July of 2009, 6 years after her husband's death shook the Parker family and the surrounding community, she finally surrendered to authorities. Prosecutors argued that her role in orchestrating the turmoil within her household and directing the plan made her the principal figure in the conspiracy. They recommended she receive a life sentence, emphasizing the severity of the case and the calculated nature of the planning behind the crime. The proposed range placed her minimum time served at 28 years and a maximum at 35 years, effectively ensuring she would spend a significant portion of her life in prison. By late August of 2009, Judy appeared before the court for final sentencing. At nearly 40 years old, she stood on the brink of a long prison term that would shape the rest of her adult life. The judge ultimately sentenced her to 33 years in prison, aligning closely with the prosecution's recommendation. The legal outcomes did not end there. The following month, Daniel, who had already admitted to his role and provided extensive cooperation to investigators, received a sentence of 23 years. Shortly afterward, in early October, Christina faced her own day in court. Having ultimately chosen to plead guilty to aiding a criminal, she received a 5-year sentence. Daniel was released in 2017 after successfully participating in a community transition court program designed to help individuals reintegrate into society. According to available reports, he deliberately chose to maintain a low-profile lifestyle, avoiding public attention and focusing on rebuilding his future quietly. Christina, on the other hand, served 4 years of her sentence before being released in 2013. Many hoped she might have the chance to move forward and build a new life after such a turbulent youth. Sadly, according to subsequent reports, Christina passed away not long after her release.
My next door neighbor, one of our other neighbors, found her dog on the street yesterday. Her car was in the driveway. She's not answering her door. There's packages on her doorstep. She's not answering her phone. Her back door is wide open. So I don't know what's going on.
A plain envelope, addressed vaguely to the Beverly Hills Police Department, arrived in the mail. Postmarked in Los Angeles, it contained only one word: cadaver, alongside the address of Berman's home. Though the note was brief, its message was chilling. It identified Berman's location with precision, yet revealed nothing about the sender. When officers arrived, the scene appeared, at first glance, almost normal. The front gate was intact, the driveway undisturbed, and the windows of the home unbroken. It was a house that suggested calm, routine, and domestic order. But inside, investigators would soon confront the stark reality. Susan Berman had been murdered. She was discovered in her bedroom, the circumstances suggesting a sudden and deliberate act. There were no signs of struggle, no missing property, and no evidence of forced entry. Susan Berman was born in 1945 in Minneapolis, Minnesota, the only child of David Davy Berman, a man who lived between two identities. To the world, he was a successful businessman and community figure. In truth, he was a trusted associate of organized crime figures who helped develop Las Vegas during its glittering, lawless rise. Susan's mother, Gladys, was a former showgirl who moved in the same rarefied, chaotic orbit of men who built empires in the desert. From the beginning, Susan's life was a blend of privilege and peril. The daughter of a man who helped shape Las Vegas from behind the velvet curtain of the mob. When Susan was still a child, the family relocated to Nevada following Davy's business ventures. Las Vegas in the 1950s was a mirage come to life. Neon lights, high-stakes gambling, celebrity faces in smoky lounges. But beneath the surface was a network of criminal alliances that kept the city humming. Her father was one of the key figures behind that network, part of the syndicate that managed casinos and ensured that operations ran smoothly and that profits flowed where they were supposed to. Susan's earliest memories were of dinner parties attended by powerful men, some with legitimate businesses, others who lived outside the law. Yet for all the power her family wielded, her childhood was marked by isolation. Davy Berman, despite his influence, was a quiet man who kept his personal life private. He shielded Susan from much of his world, but she absorbed its lessons all the same. Discretion, loyalty, and the unspoken rule that some things were never to be discussed. When he died suddenly of a heart attack in 1957, Susan was only 12. His death marked a fracture that would define her adolescence. Her mother, already fragile, spiraled into grief and dependency, leaving Susan effectively alone. The glamorous world she had known vanished overnight, replaced by instability and loss. As she grew older, Susan carried that early duality, the combination of confidence and vulnerability that made her both captivating and unpredictable. She was intelligent, articulate, and strikingly aware of her heritage. Yet she also longed for a sense of belonging, of identity beyond being the mobster's daughter. Education became her refuge. She attended the University of California, Los Angeles, where she studied journalism and communications. It was there, amid the cultural shifts of the 1960s, that she began to reinvent herself. At UCLA, Susan stood out. She had an effortless charm that drew people in, the kind of charisma that made even her smallest gestures feel like performances. But underneath that sparkle was an undercurrent of melancholy, a young woman who carried her father's legend like both armor and burden. She was fascinated by human behavior, by the ways people constructed versions of themselves. That fascination would later become the foundation of her writing, where she dissected power, loyalty, and deception with the precision of someone who had seen them up close. It was also at UCLA that she met a fellow student who would change her life, Robert Durst, the reserved and eccentric heir to one of New York's wealthiest real estate dynasties. The two shared little on the surface. She, the daughter of a mobster, he, the son of Manhattan privilege. But they recognized something familiar in each other. Both had grown up in families where power was absolute and secrets were currency. Both had lost parents young and carried the psychological weight of that loss. They became close friends, bonded by shared trauma and an instinctive understanding of the darker edges of wealth and legacy. In the years that followed, Susan built a career as a writer and journalist. She contributed to publications including New York Magazine and the Los Angeles Times, where her pieces often reflected her fascination with identity and reinvention. As her literary reputation grew, so did her social presence. She moved in creative circles in Los Angeles and New York, known for her sharp wit and lively storytelling. Her friends described her as fiercely loyal, often to a fault. She was the kind of person who collected people's secrets and guarded them as her own. Yet behind that loyalty, there was always an element of performance. Susan's life, much like her father's city, was built on layers. What she showed the world and what she concealed beneath it. Despite her outward success, Susan's personal life was marked by instability. She never married and had no children. Friends said she craved connection but often sabotaged it, perhaps fearing that true intimacy would expose too much of her vulnerability. She lived alone in a modest home in Benedict Canyon, a quiet enclave in Beverly Hills, surrounded by books, photographs, and memories of a past that refused to stay buried. Money, too, was often a problem. Her inheritance from her father had dwindled, and her writing income was unpredictable. Yet, she maintained an image of composure. Always well-dressed, always articulate, always in control. Underneath that image, however, she was struggling. She had grown accustomed to being surrounded by powerful people, yet she was now on the periphery of that world. The literary fame she once enjoyed had faded. Old friends were busy with families or careers, and as the years passed, she became more dependent on the few relationships that tethered her to her past, especially her friendship with Robert Durst. To those who knew her, it was clear that Susan saw Durst not just as a friend, but as a mirror of her own contradictions. Someone born into privilege, shaped by loss, and haunted by secrets. Theirs was a friendship built on decades of shared confidences. When Durst's wife, Kathy, disappeared in 1982, Susan reportedly became one of his staunchest defenders. According to later reports and testimonies, she acted as his informal spokesperson, deflecting inquiries and offering reassurance to those who questioned him. Whether out of loyalty, denial, or fear, she stood by him when others distanced themselves. It was an act that demonstrated her unwavering commitment to those she loved, but it also drew her deeper into a story that would one day consume her own. Through the 1990s, Susan's life oscillated between creative bursts and quiet decline. She worked on screenplays and television projects, often exploring themes of loyalty and betrayal. She was drawn to characters who lived in moral gray zones, perhaps because she recognized parts of herself in them. She spoke openly about her father's legacy, but less so about her own emotional struggles. Behind closed doors, she was known to be anxious and at times fearful. Friends recalled that she sometimes felt watched or followed, though it was never clear whether that fear was grounded in reality or memory. By the late 1990s, Susan's finances were deteriorating. She confided to close friends that she was waiting for money owed to her, possibly from Durst, who had often supported her financially. Despite her troubles, she remained socially active, maintaining her network of friends in the entertainment and literary worlds. But those who saw her during those years described a subtle shift. She was more introspective, more cautious in her conversations, and occasionally, her humor carried an edge of sadness. She was both tough and tender, secretive yet open, confident yet perpetually insecure. She lived her life like a story she was constantly rewriting, trying to find the perfect ending. What she couldn't know, what no one around her could foresee, was that her final chapter would not be written by her own hand. The morning of December 23rd, 2000, in Benedict Canyon, Los Angeles, began like any other winter day. Yet behind the gates of 1527 Benedict Canyon Drive, an ordinary household would soon become the center of a national mystery. Berman's home, tucked away on a narrow, winding road, was the kind of place that offered both seclusion and security. Neighbors recalled seeing Susan arriving for errands or leaving for appointments in her modest car, often wearing casual attire and sunglasses, blending into the landscape despite her fame. Yet on that particular weekend, her absence went unnoticed at first. It was the holiday season, a time when neighbors were traveling or entertaining guests, and many assumed her silence was a matter of routine. The first unusual sign came from her dogs, small, loyal companions who had become accustomed to the daily rhythm of their owner's life. On the morning of the 23rd, they were found wandering outside the home, unaccompanied and agitated. In a neighborhood where privacy was paramount, neighbors initially hesitated to interfere. Some tried calling the house, but the phones went unanswered. The door, slightly ajar, hinted that something was amiss. Still, for many, there was no immediate cause for alarm. It wasn't until Christmas Eve that authorities were formally alerted. A plain envelope, addressed vaguely to the Beverly Hills Police Department, arrived in the mail. Postmarked in Los Angeles, it contained only one word: cadaver, alongside the address of Berman's home. The handwriting was distinctive: block letters, uneven in spacing, with a peculiar spelling of Beverly Hills. Though the note was brief, its message was chilling. It identified Berman's location with precision, yet revealed nothing about the sender. When officers arrived, the scene appeared, at first glance, almost normal. The front gate was intact, the driveway undisturbed, and the windows of the home unbroken. It was a house that suggested calm, routine, and domestic order. But inside, investigators would soon confront the stark reality. Susan Berman had been murdered. She was discovered in her bedroom, the circumstances suggesting a sudden and deliberate act. There were no signs of struggle, no missing property, and no evidence of forced entry. The detectives who processed the scene noted the remarkable contrast between the apparent serenity of the home and that had occurred within it. Berman's possessions remained in place. Her purse, identification, and daily essentials were undisturbed. Even personal items like her telephone and laptop were left exactly where she had used them. The methodical nature of the crime suggested premeditation. A person who had calculated the time, the access, and the opportunity, and who had carefully chosen when and how to act. Initial interviews with neighbors yielded few clues. Most recalled seeing her recently, noting nothing unusual about her behavior. Some mentioned a phone call she had made earlier in the week, discussing an expected visitor, a friend from out of town. Others remembered casual holiday preparations, a small Christmas tree, a few wrapped gifts, and the scent of baked goods in the kitchen. No one could reconcile these normal, almost mundane details with the shocking discovery that followed. For law enforcement, the cadaver note became both a breakthrough and a puzzle. On one hand, it had guided police directly to the body. On the other, its brevity and clinical tone offered no insight into motive, identity, or timing. The spelling error in Beverly Hills hinted at a particular handwriting style, but forensic analysis at the time could only produce tentative matches. The note's sender was someone who knew Berman personally, intimately even, and yet wanted to conceal themselves. The paradox was evident. Someone had committed murder, yet ensured discovery. In the immediate aftermath, Beverly Hills authorities faced a pressing dilemma: how to investigate the death of a woman whose life had intersected with powerful figures, organized crime, and one of New York's wealthiest families. Berman was not merely another homicide statistic. She was a known figure, with connections and history that made the case inherently high profile. Police quickly realized that any misstep could have significant consequences, both in terms of public scrutiny and potential legal ramifications. The media response was swift and intense. National and local outlets immediately highlighted her background, her father's mob associations, her literary accomplishments, and her friendship with Robert Durst. Headlines ranged from factual reporting to speculative analysis, emphasizing the mystery of a woman who had long lived in the intersection of wealth, influence, and secrecy. Yet, despite the media attention, the police emphasized caution. There were no confirmed suspects, no witnesses, and no immediate forensic evidence that could conclusively identify the perpetrator. Within law enforcement, the initial theory leaned toward a targeted killing. The absence of theft, the apparent familiarity of the perpetrator, and the timely discovery all suggested that Berman's murder was deliberate, calculated, and personal. Officers considered the possibility that her death was linked to her decades-long association with Robert Durst, who, at the time, was already a figure of interest in the cold case of his missing wife, Kathleen Durst. But early in the investigation, detectives could only hypothesize. There were no admissions, no confessions, and no physical evidence connecting Durst, or anyone else, to the crime. In addition to potential motives tied to her personal connections, investigators examined Berman's financial situation. She had experienced monetary difficulties, including unpaid rent and sporadic income from her writing. Some detectives considered the possibility of a robbery or financial dispute, though the absence of stolen property quickly cast doubt on that theory. It became increasingly clear that the murder was less about material gain and more about personal or professional consequences. The timeline of her last known movements was reconstructed meticulously. Police interviews revealed that Berman had spoken to friends and colleagues in the days leading up to her death, discussing expected visits, holiday plans, and writing projects. She had expressed minor anxieties, particularly regarding a potential conversation with investigators about Durst's past. While friends described these concerns as ordinary apprehensions, law enforcement noted that such details could indicate that Berman feared the disclosure of sensitive information that could implicate powerful figures or reopen unresolved cases. Forensic teams examined the home and its surroundings with care. Despite the absence of overt physical evidence, subtle clues were recorded. Fingerprints, shoe prints, and potential DNA sources were meticulously collected, though much of it yielded inconclusive results. Investigators also focused on electronic records, phone logs, letters, and correspondence as possible windows into her final interactions. Every email, note, and letter became a potential key to understanding why and how she was killed. The case rapidly grew into a complex web of personal relationships, past events, and potential criminal motives. In the months that followed, detectives re-interviewed friends, colleagues, and family members. They reviewed Berman's published work, correspondence, and social interactions, searching for evidence that might point to a suspect. They considered her friendship with Robert Durst, her family's historical ties to organized crime, and her financial entanglements. Each lead was pursued carefully, aware that missteps could compromise the case or alert potential suspects. By the end of 2001, despite exhaustive investigation, the identity of Berman's killer remained a mystery. Police had reconstructed her movements, verified her relationships, and established a timeline. Yet the absence of clear forensic evidence made prosecution impossible. The case remained cold. For Susan Berman's friends and the public, her death was shocking in part because of the apparent contradiction between her life and her murder. She had lived cautiously, understood the dangers of her past, and navigated circles of influence with skill and discretion. And yet, in the quiet of Benedict Canyon, she was killed by someone who had gained her trust, someone who had penetrated the protective layers she had built around herself. From the moment detectives began analyzing the circumstances of Susan Berman's death, one name repeatedly surfaced in every line of inquiry: Robert Durst. Their connection, spanning decades, was more than a casual friendship. It was a relationship forged through shared history, personal loyalty, and the weight of complex secrets. When detectives reconstructed her final days, a critical detail emerged. In the weeks leading up to her death, Berman had discussed with friends her expectation that Durst might visit California. She had allegedly mentioned that he was flying in and that she would meet with him privately. This detail, seemingly innocuous to casual observers, became a focal point in the investigation. Law enforcement concluded that the timing of her death, in close proximity to Durst's movements, could not be overlooked. Whoever committed the murder had intimate knowledge of Berman's routines, knowledge she may have shared willingly, or someone may have used surreptitiously. The handwriting analysis of the infamous cadaver note became one of the strongest links between the crime scene and Durst. Sent anonymously to the Beverly Hills Police Department, the note was brief, stark, and chilling. It included only the word cadaver and the address of Berman's home. Analysts noted the similarities between this note and letters Durst had written to Berman over the years. The same block lettering, spacing irregularities, and idiosyncratic flourishes suggested a single author. While handwriting analysis alone could not constitute absolute proof, it provided a circumstantial connection that aligned with other investigative findings. Financial ties further complicated the narrative. investigators learned that Berman had occasionally acted as a mediator for Durst's financial and personal matters. She had facilitated certain transactions, communicated on his behalf, and even received funds at various points. While these interactions were mundane in isolation, in the context of a homicide investigation, they suggested both access and motive. Berman had knowledge of Durst's personal affairs that, if revealed, could have jeopardized his legal standing, particularly regarding the decades-old disappearance of his wife. Law enforcement also explored Durst's patterns of behavior. His life was characterized by mobility, secrecy, and evasiveness. During early interviews, Durst was elusive. He acknowledged knowing Berman but denied involvement in her death. He suggested he had not seen her recently and expressed sorrow at her passing. Law enforcement found inconsistencies in his statements, however, particularly concerning his whereabouts in December 2000. Airline records, hotel reservations, and witness accounts later indicated that Durst was in California around the time of Berman's murder, though no immediate physical evidence tied him to the crime scene. Airline records, hotel reservations, and witness accounts later indicated that Durst was in California around the time of Berman's murder, though no immediate physical evidence tied him to the crime scene. Moreover, law enforcement examined Durst's communications with Berman in the months leading up to her death. Certain letters indicated tension, veiled concerns, or requests for discretion. Investigators considered the possibility that Berman had become a liability, intentionally or inadvertently, and that the timing of her death was influenced by this dynamic. The culmination of these factors, the long-standing personal relationship, the letters, the financial interactions, and Durst's behavioral patterns, created a compelling circumstantial link between him and the murder. It was not proof in isolation, but combined, these elements pointed investigators toward a suspect whose life and choices had intersected with Berman's at every critical juncture. Even as evidence accumulated, law enforcement recognized the complexity of prosecuting someone like Durst. His wealth, mobility, and history of legal maneuvering meant that any case would require meticulous documentation and corroboration. Investigators prioritized the preservation of documents, letters, phone records, and witness statements, anticipating that Durst would challenge any assertion of guilt. As months turned into years, Durst remained a person of interest. The connection to Berman did not yield immediate charges, in part because physical evidence linking him to the scene was lacking. Yet investigators continued to build a dossier. Letters, interviews, handwriting analyses, and circumstantial patterns all suggested that any thorough examination of the case could not ignore Durst's potential involvement. As months turned into years, Susan Berman's murder became one of those haunting Los Angeles mysteries. Tragic, unresolved, and gradually fading from public attention. But within police circles, her case never really closed. Detectives kept returning to the same question. Why had someone written that note? The killer could have left the body undiscovered for weeks. Instead, they pointed the police right to it. It was as if guilt had forced their hand. Meanwhile, across the country in New York, the Kathy Durst case refused to die. Her family, convinced Robert Durst had been involved in her disappearance, continued to pressure authorities to act. By the early 2000s, renewed attention from journalists and true crime writers began connecting the two women's fates. One had vanished, the other had been silenced. Both had known the same man. Then came 2001, and with it, a strange and shocking development. Durst was arrested in Galveston, Texas, under an assumed identity, accused of killing his elderly neighbor, Morris Black. The details were bizarre. Durst claimed self-defense, but admitted to dismembering the body and dumping it in Galveston Bay. He was charged with murder, yet incredibly, a Texas jury acquitted him in 2003. They believed his account that the killing had been accidental. Still, the trial pulled Durst back into the public eye. The name Susan Berman resurfaced in headlines, her photograph often appearing beside Kathy's. For Los Angeles detectives, it was a grim reminder that their case remained unsolved, and that their prime suspect had once again walked free. Years passed, evidence degraded, witnesses moved or died, but the story refused to let go. Then, in 2010, a new generation of investigators revisited the Berman file. Forensic science had evolved. So had the way police built circumstantial cases. They requested fresh handwriting analysis on the cadaver note. At the same time, they quietly began re-interviewing Susan's friends, searching for inconsistencies or forgotten details. Many recalled that Susan had been expecting a visit shortly before her death. Someone from out of town. Someone she trusted. In 2013, a team of documentarians working on an HBO project about Robert Durst contacted authorities. They had been granted rare access to Durst himself. On-camera interviews, personal letters, decades of archival material. Among the items they obtained were handwritten notes from Durst to Susan, mailed years before her death. The resemblance to the cadaver note was undeniable. Same block letters, same spacing, same idiosyncratic spelling. For investigators, it was a breakthrough. In March 2015, Robert Durst was arrested in New Orleans, charged with the murder of Susan Berman. The timing was no coincidence. Detectives knew the broadcast would cause a media storm, and they wanted him in custody before he could disappear again. When they searched his hotel room, they found cash, disguises, and a loaded handgun. It was as if he'd been preparing to vanish, just as he had before. The Los Angeles District Attorney's Office now had what it needed, a narrative supported by new evidence. They built their case methodically. The motive, prosecutors said, was clear. Berman was about to speak to authorities about Kathy Durst's disappearance, and Durst couldn't allow that. The cadaver note was his mistake, the one thing that tied him irrevocably to her death. In the years that followed, the investigation grew into one of the most intricate cold case reopenings in modern LA history. Forensic analysts pored over documents, voice recordings, travel records, and witness statements spanning 3 decades. Every thread led back to the same intersection: friendship, loyalty, and betrayal. Former friends described the strange bond between Susan and Robert. They said Susan had always seen him as someone misunderstood, someone she could protect. She was loyal to a fault, one friend told investigators. If Bobby called, she would answer, no matter what. That loyalty, prosecutors would later argue, cost her life. But even as the evidence mounted, the case against Durst was far from simple. His defense team claimed there was no physical proof placing him at the scene. The cadaver note, they said, could have been written by anyone. Durst himself, in interviews, admitted to writing a similar note, but denied killing Susan. "She was my best friend," he told. "I didn't want her body to rot there, that's all." It was an admission that raised more questions than it answered. By 2019, nearly 2 decades after Susan's death, the case was finally ready for trial. Detectives who had long since retired returned to testify. Handwriting experts prepared their analyses. Friends and journalists lined up as witnesses. The murder of Susan Berman, once dismissed as an unsolvable mystery, was about to be heard in court. Still, even as the case approached trial, questions lingered. Had Susan truly intended to betray her friend, or was she simply caught between loyalty and self-preservation? Did she invite Durst into her home, unaware of what was coming, or did she sense it in those final moments? The investigation could uncover evidence, but not motive in its purest human form. Fear, regret, trust. Those answers died with her in Benedict Canyon. As prosecutors prepared their case and defense attorneys sharpened theirs, the world waited. The trial began in March 2020, delayed multiple times by the pandemic. Reporters called it the final chapter in a story that had started with a missing wife, stretched across the country, and ended in a quiet house in Benedict Canyon. But the courtroom wasn't filled with Hollywood theatrics. It was steady, deliberate, methodical. A slow unspooling of truth and lies that had tangled together for decades. The prosecution's case was simple, but devastating. They said Robert Durst had killed Susan Berman because she was about to reveal his darkest secret, that she had helped him cover up the disappearance of his wife, Kathleen "Kathy" Durst, back in 1982. Susan had been his confidant, his alibi, and his protector. And now, with the New York authorities reopening Kathy's case, she had become a liability. The evidence that tied Durst to Susan's murder wasn't built on fingerprints or DNA. It was built on patterns, habits, words, and most importantly, handwriting. The infamous cadaver note, sent to police after Susan's death, became the prosecution's centerpiece. Jurors were shown side-by-side comparisons of that note and a letter Durst had written to Susan years earlier. The similarities were striking. The blocky capitals, the spacing, even the same misspelling of Beverly Hills. Experts testified that the odds of the two notes being written by different people were infinitesimally small. Then came the moment that stunned the courtroom. Durst himself had admitted during his HBO interviews for the Jinx that he had written the cadaver note. His explanation? He claimed he had found Susan's body and, in a panic, anonymously alerted police. To prosecutors, it was an admission that made no sense. Why hadn't he called 911? Why hadn't he stayed? Why, they asked, would he fly across the country, visit his friend unannounced, find her dead, and leave without telling anyone? Unless, of course, he already knew what he would find? Durst sat still through most of the proceedings, frail but alert. Age and illness had changed him. The once reclusive millionaire now looked more like a patient than a predator. Hunched in a wheelchair, his voice rasping, his hands trembling slightly as he turned pages of notes. But despite his appearance, he was still sharp. When it came time to testify, he insisted on taking the stand in his own defense. Over 15 days of testimony, Durst told his story. Long, winding, sometimes contradictory, but strangely captivating. He spoke of his love for Susan, of his grief over her death, of his paranoia and loneliness. He denied killing her, denied any involvement in his wife's disappearance, denied being the monster the media had made him out to be. But under cross-examination, his answers began to unravel. Prosecutors pressed him on details, his travel records, his lies to police, the inconsistencies in his stories. Time and again, he tried to explain them away as coincidences or confusion. Yet the more he spoke, the deeper the contradictions became. The jury heard recordings from the Jinx, where Durst's voice, calm, detached, seemed to narrate his own guilt. "What the hell did I do? Killed them all, of course." Those words echoed through the courtroom like a ghost. His lawyers argued the comment was rambling, edited out of context, nothing more than a nervous man talking to himself. But to the jurors, it sounded like something else entirely. A moment of truth from a man who had spent his life running from it. Outside the courthouse, the media swarmed. Every day, cameras lined the steps, waiting for glimpses of Durst's wheelchair being rolled through the doors. Commentators dissected each piece of testimony, every word from the stand. To the public, it was the dramatic finale to a decades-long mystery. The defense tried to paint Durst as misunderstood. They emphasized his age, his failing health, his long history of eccentricity. They said he had been a target of sensational journalism, not a murderer. They reminded the jury that there were no fingerprints, no eyewitnesses, no weapon. They said the state's case was built on theories and coincidences. "You don't convict a man because of a TV show," one defense attorney argued. "You convict with evidence, and there isn't any." But the prosecution's case was about more than evidence. It was about motive and pattern. They laid out the timeline. Kathy's disappearance in 1982, Susan's murder in 2000, and Durst's strange involvement in the killing of Morris Black in 2001. Each event, they argued, revealed the same behavior. A man who eliminated problems rather than facing them. When someone threatened to expose him, they disappeared. When the past caught up to him, he ran. The trial lasted 5 months, stretching through the summer of 2021. The pandemic delayed proceedings, but not momentum. When the closing arguments began, both sides knew what was at stake. Not just the fate of Robert Durst, but the legacy of Susan Berman. In September 2021, after a day and a half of deliberation, the jury returned with its verdict. The courtroom fell silent as the foreperson stood and read the decision. "We, the jury, find the defendant, Robert Durst, guilty of the crime of first-degree murder." There was no audible reaction from Durst. He sat still, eyes forward, hands clasped. 1 month later, Durst was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. The judge called the murder a calculated, cold-blooded crime carried out against someone who had once been his closest friend.